The thunderous gallop of hooves echoed through the Montana Valley as Abram Young raced his stallion over the ridge, the first rays of sunrise painting the landscape in gold and crimson. His heart pounded with urgency, not for himself, but for his two young children waiting alone at their modest homestead. 3 days gone on a cattle drive that ended early when news reached him that a spring storm was heading toward his land. 3 days too long to leave 7-year-old Joshua and 5-year-old Sarah with only elderly Mrs. Winthrop from the neighboring farm checking in twice daily. Montana Territory, 1878. A place where nature's beauty matched its cruelty, where survival demanded everything a man had to give and then asked for more. As Abram crested the hill that would give him the first view of his property, something unexpected caught his eye in the south pasture. A figure kneeled in the tall grass, bent over what appeared to be one of the young colts from his small but growing herd. He pulled back on the reins, slowing Thunder to a walk as he approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. The figure, a woman, was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice his approach until he was nearly upon her. Her hands moved with surprising skill as she wrapped a makeshift splint around the colt's front leg. "Madam," Abram called out, keeping his voice low to avoid startling her or the injured animal. The woman jerked upright, spinning to face him. Wide, emerald eyes locked with his beneath the brim of a well-worn hat, her copper-brown hair escaping in wisps around a face both delicate and strong. The freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks spoke of long days under the sun. "This little one got himself caught in a gopher hole," she said without preamble, turning back to her patient. "Leg's not broken, thankfully, just a bad sprain. I've wrapped it tight enough to support, but not so tight it'll cut circulation." Abram dismounted, approaching slowly. The colt was one of the new foals born just a month ago, still gangly and uncertain on its legs even before the injury. "You know horses," he observed, crouching beside her. "My father was a horse trainer," she replied, tying off the bandage with expert fingers. "I grew up learning his trade. I'm Abram Young. This is my land you're on, Mississippi. Daniella Everett." She wiped her hands on her skirts before offering one to shake. "Miss Everett to most, but Danny to friends. I've taken the teaching position at Silver Creek. I was exploring the area before term starts next week when I heard this little one crying out." Abram took her hand, noting both its strength and softness. "The schoolteacher? We've been expecting you. Town's been without one for nearly a year now." "So I've heard." She smiled, and something warm flickered in Abram's chest, a feeling so long forgotten he barely recognized it. "Though I didn't expect to be introducing myself while trespassing. I apologize for that." A distant roll of thunder interrupted them, and Abram glanced at the darkening western sky. "Storm's coming in faster than I thought. We need to get this colt back to the barn." He looked at her properly for the first time, noting how her simple blue dress was already damp from kneeling in the morning dew. "And you shouldn't be riding back to town in this weather." "I can manage," she insisted, though her gaze followed his to the threatening clouds. "My place is just over that rise. We can shelter the colt there and wait out the worst of it." When she hesitated, he added, "My children are there with Mrs. Winthrop. You'll be perfectly proper, Miss Everett." Together they managed to get the reluctant colt standing. Daniella gathered her horse from where it grazed nearby, and they slowly made their way toward the Young homestead, the injured foal hobbling between them as the first fat raindrops began to fall. By the time they reached the barn, rain was pouring from the sky in sheets. They settled the colt in a clean stall with fresh hay and water before making a dash for the main house, arriving soaked despite the short distance. "Papa!" Two small voices cried out in unison as Abram pushed open the door, and suddenly his arms were full of his children. "You're early," Joshua exclaimed, his small arms tight around Abram's waist. "And all wet," Sarah added, giggling as she touched his dripping shirt. "The storm chased me home," Abram explained, ruffling their hair. "And I brought company." The children's attention immediately shifted to Daniella, who stood awkwardly in the doorway, water pooling at her feet. Mrs. Winthrop appeared from the kitchen, her wizened face breaking into a smile. "My stars, if it isn't our new schoolmistress. What a way to make an acquaintance." Miss Everett was tending to an injured colt in the south pasture, Abram explained. "The storm caught us by surprise." "Well, Don't just stand there dripping on my clean floor. Mrs. Winthrop scolded good-naturedly. Miss Everett, come with me. I'm sure I can find something dry for you to wear. While Daniella followed the older woman, Abram changed quickly and returned to find his children peppering the schoolteacher with questions. She'd been dressed in one of his late wife's simpler dresses, the blue cotton a touch too large but cinched at the waist with a belt. Something twisted in his chest at the sight, not pain, as he might have expected, but a strange sense of rightness. Papa said we can start school this year, Sarah was saying, bouncing on her toes with excitement. I already know all my letters. That's wonderful, Daniella smiled, and Abram noticed how it lit her entire face. You'll be ahead of the class already. I can do sums too, Joshua added, not to be outdone by his sister. Up to 20. Well, it seems I have some very bright students to look forward to. Daniella glanced up, catching Abram watching her. For a moment, something passed between them, a connection he couldn't name but felt in his bones. Mr. Young, I can't thank you enough for your hospitality, she said, breaking the moment. I should return to town as soon as the rain lets up. Nonsense, Mrs. Winthrop interjected before Abram could respond. That storm set in for the day. You'll stay for supper at least. I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, Abram found himself saying. Besides, I'd like to hear more about your plans for the school. My children's education is important to me. And so she stayed, helping Mrs. Winthrop prepare the evening meal, while Abram tended to necessary chores around the property between downpours. The children followed Daniella like shadows, clearly enchanted by the young teacher's patient answers to their endless questions. By the time they sat down to supper, it felt as though Daniella had always been a part of their small circle. She spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her training at a ladies' seminary in Boston, and her decision to answer the call for teachers in the Western Territories. My father passed last year, she explained, a shadow crossing her features. There was nothing keeping me in the East anymore. I wanted adventure, purpose. And you found it in Silver Creek? Abram asked, passing her a plate of fresh biscuits. I hope to, she replied, meeting his gaze. There's something honest about this country. Unforgiving, perhaps, but real in a way the drawing rooms of Philadelphia never were. After the meal, with the children settled by the fire with a book of stories, Abram found himself alone with Daniella as they washed the supper dishes. Mrs. Winthrop had retired to the rocking chair, her knitting needles clicking steadily. Your children are wonderful, Daniella said softly, accepting a plate to dry. They're bright and curious, every teacher's dream. They're everything to me, Abram replied, his voice equally low. After their mother died. They're what kept me going. Daniella's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. I'm sorry for your loss. It's been 3 years now. Consumption. He found himself continuing, though he rarely spoke of Elizabeth to anyone. She fought it hard, but winters are brutal here. By spring, she was gone. And you've raised them alone since then? With help from Mrs. Winthrop and a few other neighbors. It takes a community out here. He paused, looking out the window where the rain continued to fall. But yes, mostly alone. Daniella nodded, understanding in her eyes. They're fortunate to have such a devoted father. I'm the fortunate one, he countered. Though I worry about them not having a mother's influence. Especially Sarah, she's reaching an age where she needs things I don't know how to provide. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished the dishes, broken only by the children's laughter as they discovered a particularly funny story in their book. The rain's not letting up, Abram observed as darkness fell completely outside. You're welcome to stay the night, Miss Everett. I can sleep in the barn, and you can have my room. Oh, I couldn't put you out of your bed, she protested. I insist. I've slept in worse places than my own barn. He smiled. And it would set a poor example for Silver Creek if I sent our new schoolteacher out in this weather to get lost or catch her death of cold. In the end, she agreed, though reluctantly. Mrs. Winthrop, despite Abram's protests that she too should stay, insisted on returning to her own home just a quarter-mile down the road. It'll take more than a little rain to keep me from my own bed, the older woman declared as Abram walked her to her wagon with a large umbrella. Besides, she added with a knowing look, that young woman is exactly what your children need right now. Mrs. Winthrop, Abram began, but she cut him off with a pat to his arm. And perhaps what you need as well, Abram Young. I've known you too long for you to fool me. I saw how you looked at her." Before he could respond, she climbed into her wagon and set off through the rain, leaving Abram standing in the yard with her words echoing in his mind. That night, after settling the children and ensuring Daniella had everything she needed, Abram made his way to the barn. As he spread his bedroll in the empty stall next to the injured colt, he found himself thinking about the schoolteacher with her capable hands and kind eyes. 3 years he'd been a widower, focused solely on survival and his children's welfare. 3 years since he'd thought of a woman as anything but a mother for his children or a neighbor to be respected. Yet in the space of a single day, Daniella Everett had awakened something he'd thought long dead. He fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof and the soft nickering of horses, his dreams filled with copper hair and emerald eyes. The morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having washed the world clean. Abram rose early, tending to the animals before heading to the house, where he was surprised to find Daniella already awake, helping the children prepare breakfast. "Good morning," she greeted, a slight flush coloring her cheeks as she caught sight of him in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind." The children were hungry, and I thought I could make myself useful. "Not at all," he replied, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "It smells wonderful." Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children eager to show Daniella everything about their home now that the sun was shining. After the meal, Abram found himself reluctant to see her go, but he knew she needed to return to town to prepare for the school term. "I should check on the colt before I leave," she said as they stood on the porch, the children having run off to their chores. "I'll accompany you," Abram offered, and together they walked to the barn. The young horse was standing when they entered, still favoring its injured leg, but looking alert and interested in its surroundings. "He's doing well," Daniella observed, running her hand gently down the colt's neck. "Keep the wrap on for at least a week, and limit his movement to this stall until the swelling goes down completely." "I will," Abram promised, watching her with the animal. "You have a gift with them." She smiled, meeting his eyes. "They're honest creatures. No pretense, no deception, just pure feeling." "Like children," he said softly. "Yes, exactly like children." She stepped back from the colt. "Speaking of which, I hope to see Joshua and Sarah on the first day of school. It's Monday next." "They'll be there," he assured her. "Wild horses couldn't keep them away, especially now that they've met their teacher." Abram helped her saddle her horse, then walked her to the edge of his property. As she prepared to leave, he found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "Perhaps you might come for supper again sometime? The children would love it." And he hesitated, then forged ahead. "So would I." Daniella's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Young." "Abram," he corrected. "Please." "Abram," she repeated, and his name had never sounded better than it did on her lips. "Until next time, then." He watched her ride away, staying until she was just a speck on the horizon before turning back to his homestead, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The following days passed in a blur of activity. The cattle drive had ended early, but there was still plenty to do around the ranch to prepare for the coming months. The children spoke of nothing but school and Miss Everett, counting the days until classes would begin. On Sunday, Abram took special care with his appearance before loading the children into the wagon for the trip to town. They attended services at the small clapboard church that served Silver Creek, and Abram found his attention wandering repeatedly to where Daniella sat several pews ahead, her copper hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. After the service, many townspeople gathered to welcome the new teacher, and Abram held back, not wanting to appear too eager. When he finally approached with the children, Daniella's face brightened visibly. "Mr. Young," she greeted, formal in the presence of others, but with warmth in her eyes. "And Joshua and Sarah, are you ready for school tomorrow?" "Yes, Miss Everett," Sarah replied enthusiastically while Joshua nodded, trying to appear more reserved as befitted his status as the elder sibling. "We were wondering if you might join us for dinner at the hotel," Abram said, suddenly aware of the interested glances from nearby townsfolk. "To celebrate your first day in Silver Creek." Daniella glanced at the curious onlookers, then back to Abram with a smile. "That would be lovely, thank you." The meal at Silver Creek's only hotel was simple but well prepared. They sat at a corner table, the children dominating the conversation with their excitement about school, leaving little opportunity for more personal discussion. Still, Abram found himself captivated by the way Daniella engaged with his children, her genuine interest in their thoughts and ideas. As they prepared to leave, he found a moment to speak with her alone while the children examined a display of penny candies at the hotel's small shop. "I was serious about that supper invitation," he said quietly. "Perhaps this coming Saturday? I make a decent stew, though nowhere near as good as Mrs. Winthrop's." Daniella's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I'd be delighted, though I hope you'll let me contribute something to the meal. I bake a passable apple pie. It's a date, then," Abram replied, then flushed at his choice of words. "That is, an arrangement. An agreement." Her laugh was like music. "I understand, Abram, and I look forward to it." The next morning, Abram watched with a mixture of pride and wistfulness as his children set off for their first day of school, lunch pails in hand and excitement evident in every step. The house seemed emptier without them, and he threw himself into work to distract from the silence. When they returned that afternoon, their chatter was nonstop, every detail of the school day recounted with enthusiasm, especially anything involving Miss Everett. "She knows so much, Papa," Joshua marveled. "She's been to New York City and Boston and even saw the ocean. And she said my writing was very neat," Sarah added proudly. "She gave me a special paper to practice my letters on with lines to make them straight." "Sounds like you both had a fine day," Abram smiled, his heart warming at their excitement. "Did she say anything about coming for supper on Saturday?" "Oh, yes." Sarah clapped her hands. "She said she's going to bring a surprise dessert and that we can help her make it." As the week progressed, Abram found himself looking for reasons to ride into town. He needed supplies from the general store, he told himself. The blacksmith had mentioned wanting to discuss new shoes for Thunder. The bank had a question about his loan payment. Each excursion somehow managed to include a casual stop by the schoolhouse, where he would tip his hat to Daniella if she happened to be outside, or occasionally exchange a few words if the opportunity presented itself. By Saturday, the young household was in a state of barely contained excitement. Abram had risen before dawn to begin preparations, cleaning the already tidy house to an even higher standard, selecting the finest cuts of venison from his storehouse for the promised stew, and even cutting fresh wildflowers for the table, a touch he knew Elizabeth would have appreciated. The children were assigned to dust and sweep, tasks they normally resisted but today attacked with enthusiasm. By mid-afternoon, everything was ready, and they watched the road with anticipation. Daniella arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, her horse pulling a small cart laden with not only the ingredients for her dessert, but also fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and a book of stories for the children. "I may have gotten carried away," she admitted as Abram helped her down from the cart, her hand warm in his. "But I was so looking forward to this that I couldn't help myself." "We're glad you did," he replied, lingering perhaps a moment too long before releasing her hand. The evening unfolded with a natural ease that surprised Abram. Daniella fit into their small home as if she had always been part of it, helping him finish the stew while the children set the table, laughing at Joshua's attempt to fold napkins into fancy shapes he'd seen at the hotel. Over dinner, they spoke of the first week of school, of Abram's plans for the ranch, of books they had read, and places they hoped to see. The conversation flowed without awkwardness or strain, and Abram found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, memories of his childhood in Tennessee, his journey west with Elizabeth, their dreams for the future. "You've built something beautiful here," Daniella said as they sat on the porch after the meal, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "It's been hard work," Abram acknowledged, "but worth every moment." "I can see that." She turned to look at him, her profile gilded by the fading light. "You're a good father, Abram. Your children are fortunate. They miss having a mother," he said quietly. "I do my best, but you give them what they need most: love, stability, a sense of belonging." Her voice was soft but certain. "The rest, well, perhaps that will come in time." The weight of her words hung between them, full of possibility. Before Abram could respond, Sarah came running up, breathless with excitement. "Miss Everett, can we make the dessert now? You promised." The moment passed as Daniella smiled and rose, following Sarah into the house with one last glance at Abram that set his heart racing. The apple dumplings they created together were a resounding success. The kitchen filled with laughter and flour-dusted faces as Daniella patiently guided small hands through the process of wrapping apple slices in pastry. As the evening drew to a close, neither Abram nor Daniella seemed eager for it to end. The children, however, were fighting yawns, and finally Abram announced it was time for bed. "Will you read us a story first, Miss Everett?" Sarah pleaded, eyes wide with hope. "Just one," Abram conceded, unable to resist his daughter's expression or perhaps the chance to extend Daniella's visit a little longer. The four of them crowded onto the small settee, Daniella in the center with a child on either side, and Abram perched at the end, close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender from her hair as she bent over the book. Her voice was melodious as she read, bringing the characters to life with different tones and expressions. Sarah was asleep before the story ended, her head resting against Daniella's arm, while Joshua valiantly fought to keep his eyes open until the final page. "I'll put them to bed," Abram whispered, carefully lifting Sarah. "Would you mind waiting? I'd like to walk you to your cart." Daniella nodded, gently shifting Joshua toward his father once Sarah had been settled in Abram's arms. "I'll clear up from dessert while you do." When Abram returned, he found the kitchen spotless and Daniella standing by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. "Thank you for tonight," he said, moving to stand beside her. "It's been wonderful." She turned to face him, her expression open and honest. "It has been, hasn't it? Your home is so full of love, Abram. It's a joy to be part of it, even briefly." "It doesn't have to be brief," he said, the words escaping before he could second-guess them. "That is, we would be happy to have you visit again. Anytime." Her smile was soft in the lamplight. "I'd like that very much." He walked her to her cart, loading the empty dishes and containers she'd brought. As he helped her up to the seat, their hands connected again, and this time neither was quick to let go. "Be careful on the road," he said, reluctantly releasing her. "There's a full moon, but still." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I've made the journey often enough now to know the way." As she prepared to depart, Abram found himself asking, "Would you like to join us for church tomorrow? We could drive into town together." Daniella's face brightened. "I'd enjoy the company. The ride to town can be quite solitary." "We'll come by for you at 9, then," he said, stepping back as she took up the reins. He watched her cart until it disappeared from sight, then turned back to the house that somehow seemed emptier than before, despite the sleeping children inside. The following weeks established a pattern. Sundays were spent together at church, often followed by a shared meal. Abram found reasons to visit town during the week, and Daniella became a regular guest at the Young homestead on Saturdays. The injured colt recovered fully under her watchful guidance, soon prancing around the pasture with its mother as if the injury had never occurred. Abram named it Phoenix, for the way it had risen from its misfortune and perhaps also for the new beginning it represented in his life. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and crimsons, Abram realized that Daniella had become essential to their family. The children adored her, running to meet her cart whenever it appeared on the horizon. More surprising to him was how deeply she had worked her way into his own heart. It was on an October afternoon, with the children at a harvest celebration in town supervised by Mrs. Winthrop, that Abram finally found the courage to speak what had been in his heart for weeks. They had ridden out together to check on a section of fencing at the far edge of his property, enjoying the crisp air and each other's company. When they reached a hilltop overlooking the valley, Abram suggested they stop to rest the horses and take in the view. "It's breathtaking," Daniella remarked as they stood side by side, surveying the patchwork of farms and ranches that made up Silver Creek's small community, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "I fell in love with this land the moment I saw it," Abram said quietly. "Knew this was where I wanted to build a life, raise a family." Daniella nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "I understand why. There's something profound about this place. It demands everything from you, but gives so much in return. It can be hard, though," he continued, turning to face her. "The winters are long, the work never ending. It's not an easy life for anyone, especially a woman accustomed to Eastern comforts." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't come west looking for an easy life, Abram. I came looking for meaning, for purpose." "Have you found it?" he asked, his heart pounding. I believe I have, she replied softly, though perhaps not entirely where I expected. Abram took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Daniella, I need to speak plainly. These past months, having you in our lives, it's brought a joy I never thought to feel again. The children adore you, and He paused, searching for the right words. I find myself thinking of you constantly, looking forward to every moment in your company. Her eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. Abram, please, let me finish, he said quickly. I know it may be too soon. I know there are considerations, your position in the community, your career. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is simply friendship or gratitude. He took her hands in his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. I'm falling in love with you, Daniella Everett. And if there's any chance you might someday return those feelings, I would be the happiest man in Montana territory. For a heart-stopping moment, she was silent, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, her expression softened into a smile that reached her eyes. Oh, Abram, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've been falling in love with you since the day you found me with that injured colt. With you, and with your wonderful children. Joy surged through him like a flash flood after summer rain. Truly. In answer, she stepped closer, her hands leaving his to rest against his chest. Truly. He cupped her face gently, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she only smiled up at him, expectant. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar somehow, despite being entirely new. The kiss was tender at first, tentative, but deepened as they each gained confidence in the other's response. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, matching smiles spreading across their faces. I should have done that weeks ago, Abram murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Daniella laughed softly. Perhaps, though I think we needed the time to be certain. And are you? Certain? He asked, suddenly serious again. Yes, she replied without hesitation. My heart is yours, Abram Young. And Joshua's and Sarah's as well. They rode back to the homestead with lighter hearts, making plans and sharing hopes for the future. By the time they reached the barn, they had agreed that they would court properly for the children's sake and for Daniella's position as teacher, but with the understanding that they were committed to a future together. The school board might not approve of their teacher being too hastily involved with a parent, Daniella explained as they unsaddled the horses. But if we proceed with appropriate decorum, I can be patient, Abram assured her, though the look he gave her suggested patience might be a struggle. They spent the remainder of the afternoon preparing supper for when Mrs. Winthrop would return with the children, moving around the kitchen together with an ease that spoke of future domesticity. When the wagon finally arrived, Joshua and Sarah tumbled out full of stories about the harvest celebrations, their excitement doubling when they discovered Miss Everett was still at the homestead. Mrs. Winthrop observed the couple with knowing eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she accepted a cup of coffee. I see things have progressed since I left this morning, she remarked quietly to Abram while the children showed Daniella the small prizes they'd won at the festival games. Is it that obvious? Abram asked, a touch of concern in his voice. Only to someone who's known you as long as I have, the older woman assured him, patting his arm. And who's been waiting for you to come back to life since Elizabeth passed? She'd approve, Abram. That girl has a good heart, and she loves your children already. His throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Thank you, Mrs. Winthrop. That means more than I can say. The autumn days grew shorter, and Daniella's visits to the Young homestead became a regular fixture in their lives. Though they maintained propriety in public, the bond between them strengthened with each passing week. As winter approached, bringing with it the prospect of difficult travel between town and the ranch, Abram found himself increasingly reluctant to be parted from Daniella for extended periods. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, he broached the subject that had been on his mind. Winter's coming, he said, watching the flames dance in the hearth. The roads will soon be difficult, if not impassable at times. I know, Daniella sighed, her head resting against his shoulder. I've been dreading it. These evenings together have become so precious to me. Abram took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I've been thinking. Perhaps it's time we spoke to Reverend Davidson. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. About marriage, he said simply. I love you, Daniella. The children love you. And the thought of spending the winter with only occasional visits when the weather permits is unbearable. Her breath caught audibly. Abram, are you proposing? He shifted to face her properly, taking both her hands in his. I am. Clumsily, perhaps, but with all my heart. Will you marry me, Daniella Everett? Will you be my wife, a mother to my children, my partner in this life we're building? Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, Abram. Yes to all of it. Their kiss sealed the promise, tender and full of hope for the future they would share. They agreed to tell the children in the morning and to speak with Reverend Davidson after Sunday services. But as they sat at breakfast, before Abram could find the right words, Sarah looked up from her porridge with a contemplative expression. Papa, she said seriously, if Miss Everett married you, would she be our mama then? The adults exchanged startled glances, and Abram cleared his throat. Well, yes, sweetheart. She would. Why do you ask? Sarah nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Good. Because I asked God for a new mama, and I think he sent Miss Everett to help that hurt Colt so you would find her. Joshua, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Would you live here with us, Miss Everett? All the time. If that's what you would want, Daniella replied carefully, her eyes moving between the children. Your father has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes. But your feelings are very important to us both. I want you to stay forever, Sarah declared emphatically. All eyes turned to Joshua, who considered the matter with the seriousness of his 8 years. Will you still be our teacher too? For now, yes, Daniella nodded. Though perhaps not forever. There might come a time when I want to focus on being your mother and helping your father with the ranch. The boy nodded slowly. I'd like that. Having you here all the time, I mean. And, he hesitated, suddenly shy. I wouldn't mind calling you Mama. After you're married to Papa, that is. Daniella's eyes filled with tears as she opened her arms, and both children rushed to embrace her. Abram watched, his own vision blurring, as the 3 people he loved most in the world formed a circle that somehow made his family complete again. The wedding was set for the week before Christmas, a time when travel would still be possible for the few guests they wished to invite. Reverend Davidson was delighted by the news, having observed the growing attachment between the schoolteacher and the rancher over the preceding months. It's a blessing for you both, the minister told them after Sunday services, where their engagement had been announced to the congregation. And for those children, they need a mother's love, and you, Miss Everett, clearly have much to give them. The school board, while initially concerned about losing their teacher, was mollified by Daniella's assurance that she would complete the school year. What happened after that would depend on many factors, including the possibility of a family of her own with Abram. As the wedding day approached, the young homestead was transformed. Fresh pine boughs decorated the main room, their fragrance mingling with the spices of the season. Sarah helped Daniella sew new curtains for the windows and a special quilt for the marriage bed, while Joshua worked alongside his father to build a larger wardrobe to accommodate Daniella's belongings. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the landscape blanketed in fresh snow that glittered in the winter sunshine. Daniella prepared at Mrs. Winthrop's house. As tradition dictated, she shouldn't see her groom before the ceremony. The older woman had become like a mother to her over the past months, offering wisdom, support, and today, helping her dress for her wedding. You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Winthrop said as she secured the final pins in Daniella's hair. The dress was simple but elegant pale blue silk that Daniella had ordered from back east, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. I'm so nervous, Daniella admitted, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the skirt. Not about marrying Abram, I've never been more certain of anything, but to become a wife and mother in one day. You've been mothering those children since the day you met them, Mrs. Winthrop said firmly. And as for being a wife, well, that will come naturally enough. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. Abram Young is a good man who clearly adores you. The rest you'll figure out together. The small church was filled to capacity with the residents of Silver Creek and surrounding farms who had come to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the respected rancher. When Daniella entered on the arm of Reverend Davidson, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father, a hush fell over the assembly. Abram waited at the altar, tall and handsome in his best suit, his children beside him. His breath caught at the sight of his bride, her copper hair gleaming in the winter light that streamed through the church windows, her eyes finding his immediately. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not only love and fidelity to each other, but also commitment to the family they were creating together. When Joshua and Sarah presented the rings, each child received a special promise from their new mother to love, guide, and cherish them always. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Davidson declared, his voice carrying to the rafters. "What God has joined together, let no one put asunder." The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous, filled with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the community twice over. As tradition dictated, everyone had contributed something to the feast, ensuring that the new couple began their life together with the blessing and support of their neighbors. As the evening drew to a close, Abram and Daniella prepared to depart for the homestead, where Mrs. Winthrop would remain with the children for 2 days while the newlyweds enjoyed a brief honeymoon. "Are you ready, Mrs. Young?" Abram asked softly as he helped his wife into their wagon, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons by well-wishers. Daniella's smile was radiant as she took his hand. "I've been ready since the day you found me with that injured colt, Mr. Young. I just didn't know it yet." The journey to their home was magical, the moonlight on snow creating a silvery path before them. They spoke little, content in the knowledge that they had a lifetime of conversations ahead. When they arrived, Abram insisted on carrying Daniella across the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It's tradition," he said firmly, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "And I intend to honor every tradition that promises us happiness." Inside, they found the house transformed. Mrs. Winthrop and the children had been busy during the ceremony and reception, preparing a welcome for the newlyweds. Fresh flowers, a luxury in December, adorned the tables, and a small feast waited on the sideboard for whenever they might be hungry. The fire had been built up, casting a warm glow throughout the main room, and candles were lit in strategic locations, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and celebration. "It's perfect," Daniella whispered, taking in the thoughtful preparations. "Not quite yet," Abram replied, setting her gently on her feet before moving to a cabinet and withdrawing a small package. "I have something for you. A wedding gift." Curiously, Daniella unwrapped the parcel to reveal a delicately carved wooden box. Opening it, she gasped at the sight of a silver pendant in the shape of a horse, intricate details bringing the miniature sculpture to life. "Abram, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from its velvet nest. "I had it made in Denver," he explained, taking the necklace to fasten it around her neck. "To commemorate how we met. If not for that injured colt, we might never have found each other," she finished, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I like to think we would have, somehow. That we were meant to be." "I believe that too," he murmured, his hands settling at her waist. "That God brought you to that pasture at exactly the right moment, not just for the colt, but for all of us." Their kiss was deeper than those they had shared before, uninhibited by the presence of children or the constraints of propriety. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their eyes dark with desire. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," Abram whispered against her lips. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with promise. "I do like the sound of that." Spring came early that year, as if nature itself celebrated the joy that filled the Young household. The marriage had blossomed through the winter months, the family growing closer as they weathered the season's challenges together. Daniella continued teaching, riding to town each day when weather permitted, but her heart was always eager to return home to her family. By April, the pastures were green again, dotted with wildflowers that Sarah insisted on gathering by the armful to decorate every surface of their home. Phoenix, now a yearling, had developed into a fine young horse with a distinctive white blaze on his forehead, Daniella's special project and pride. It was on a warm afternoon, with the children helping Abram mend fences in the north pasture, that Daniella finally confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. Sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Winthrop, who had come to help with spring cleaning, she shared her news. "I believe I'm with child," she said quietly, her hands cradling a cup of tea. "All the signs are there." Mrs. Winthrop's weathered face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, my dear, what wonderful news. Have you told Abram yet?" "Not yet," Daniella admitted. "I wanted to be certain, and perhaps find the right moment." The older woman nodded understandingly. "This will bring him such happiness. Both of you have so much love to give, it's only natural that your family would grow." That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniella led Abram to the porch swing where they often sat to watch the stars emerge. The air was soft with the promise of summer, the scent of apple blossoms drifting from the small orchard they had planted together in the fall. "I have something to tell you," she began, nestled against his side as the swing moved gently back and forth. Abram turned to look at her, concern flickering across his features. "Is everything all right? You seem tired lately." "Everything is perfect," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat abdomen. "Especially right here." For a moment, he looked confused, then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed swiftly by wonder. "Daniella, are you saying—" "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, her voice trembling with emotion. In autumn, around the time of our anniversary, Abram pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." They sat in joyful silence for a long moment, both contemplating the new life growing within her. "I hope you know," Abram finally said, his hand still resting protectively over her midsection, "that I fell in love with you for yourself, not just because you were wonderful with my children, though you are, but because you're strong and kind and brave enough to build a new life in a place most Eastern women would find too harsh." "I know," she said softly, "just as I fell in love with you for the man you are not, simply because you were a father in need of a mother for his children, though that was part of what drew me to you, but because you have the most generous heart of anyone I've ever known." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude into the connection between them. When they parted, Daniella rested her head on his shoulder, content in the knowledge that their family, already rich in love, would soon expand to welcome a new member. "When shall we tell Joshua and Sarah?" Abram asked, his fingers combing gently through her hair, loosened from its usual pins for the evening. "Tomorrow," Daniella decided. "Together. They should hear it from both of us." The children's reaction the next morning was everything they could have hoped for. Sarah squealed with delight, immediately peppering them with questions about names and whether the baby would be a boy or girl. Joshua, more reserved but equally excited, wanted to know what he could do to help prepare for the new arrival. "You're already helping by being such a wonderful big brother to Sarah," Daniella told him, drawing the boy into an embrace. "This baby will be very lucky to have you looking out for them too." As spring turned to summer, the news of the coming baby spread throughout Silver Creek, met with congratulations and offers of support from neighbors and friends. Daniella completed the school year, bidding a temporary farewell to teaching with the promise that she would return when the baby was old enough, if not as a full-time teacher, then perhaps to help with special subjects or older students. The young homestead continued to flourish under the combined efforts of its inhabitants. Abram's cattle herd grew, as did his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. The small orchard they had planted began to establish itself, promising future harvests. And most importantly, the bonds of family strengthened with each passing day. By the time autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds once more, Daniella was ready to welcome their child into the world. Mrs. Winthrop moved temporarily into the guest room to be on hand for the birth, her experience as a midwife a comfort to both expectant parents. The labor began on a crisp October morning, just as the sun peaked over the eastern mountains. Abram, who had been helping Joshua with early chores, rushed back to the house at Mrs. Winthrop's call, his heart pounding with both excitement and fear. "Everything is progressing normally," the older woman assured him. "First babies often take their time. You take the children to do their lessons in the barn, and I'll call you when there's news." The hours that followed were among the longest of Abram's life. He tried to focus on keeping the children occupied, reviewing their reading and arithmetic as Daniella had taught him to do during her absence, but his mind constantly returned to the house, where his wife labored to bring their child into the world. It was nearly sunset when Mrs. Winthrop finally appeared at the barn door, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. You have a daughter, she announced. A beautiful, healthy girl with her mother's eyes and a set of lungs that would put a mountain lion to shame. Abram felt his knees weaken with relief and joy. And Daniella? Tired but well. She's asking for you, all of you. They found Daniella propped up in bed, her copper hair damp with perspiration but her face glowing as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in the special quilt she and Sarah had made together. She looked up as her family entered, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. Come meet your sister, she said softly to Joshua and Sarah, who approached the bed with wide eyes. Abram hung back for a moment, overcome with emotion at the sight of his wife with their newborn daughter. Then, drawn by an irresistible force, he moved to sit beside them, peering down at the tiny face nestled against Daniella's breast. She's perfect, he whispered, gently touching the downy auburn hair that already showed signs of matching her mother's copper tones. Would you like to hold her? Daniella asked, carefully transferring the swaddled infant to his arms. Abram cradled his daughter with practiced ease, marveling at how such a tiny being could instantly capture his heart so completely. The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny mouth forming what might have been a yawn or perhaps her first attempt at a smile. Hello, little one, he murmured. We've been waiting for you. What's her name? Sarah asked, standing on tiptoe to better see her new sister. Abram and Daniella exchanged a look. They had discussed various possibilities, but had waited to make the final decision until they met their child. Elizabeth, Daniella said softly, honoring the woman who had given life to Joshua and Sarah. Elizabeth Hope Young. Tears welled in Abram's eyes as he nodded his agreement. It's perfect, just like her. The following days were a blur of adjustments and discoveries as they all adapted to life with a newborn. Elizabeth, quickly nicknamed Ellie by her siblings, proved to be a generally contented baby, though she made her displeasure known loudly when hungry or uncomfortable. Abram found himself falling into a new rhythm, rising early to handle the ranch chores with Joshua's help so that Daniella could rest when the baby did. Sarah appointed herself official helper to her new mother, fetching diapers, preparing simple meals, and entertaining Ellie with songs and stories when the infant was awake. One evening, about 2 weeks after Ellie's birth, Abram returned from the barn to find Daniella sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, the baby nursing contentedly at her breast, while Sarah read aloud from a primer and Joshua sketched something at the table. The scene struck him with such profound happiness that he paused in the doorway, committing every detail to memory. This was the family he had once feared might never be whole again after Elizabeth's death. Different, yes, but complete in its own way, expanded by love rather than diminished by loss. Daniella looked up, catching his gaze, and smiled the smile that had first captured his heart that day in the pasture with the injured colt. Welcome home, she said simply. Home, he repeated, crossing the room to place a kiss on her forehead, then one each for his children, including the newest addition, who had fallen asleep at her mother's breast. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. As winter settled once more over Silver Creek, the Young family celebrated their first Christmas together in their expanded form. The house was filled with the scents of pine and cinnamon, the sounds of children's laughter and a baby's coos, and most of all, with the love that had brought them together and continued to grow with each passing day. On Christmas Eve, after the older children had finally gone to bed, buzzing with excitement for the morning to come, Abram and Daniella stood by the cradle where little Ellie slept peacefully, her tiny fists curled beside her rosy cheeks. Did you ever imagine, that day in the pasture, that this would be our life a year later? Daniella asked softly, leaning into her husband's embrace. Abram tightened his arm around her waist, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. I knew when I saw you with that colt, your gentleness, your determination, that you were someone special. But this, he gestured to encompass their home, their sleeping children, the life they had built together. This is beyond anything I dared to hope for. Daniella turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining in the firelight. When I came west, I was looking for purpose, for a place to belong. I found all that and more with you and the children. And we found the missing piece of our family in you, Abram replied, brushing a strand of copper hair from her cheek. The mother my children needed. The woman I didn't know I was waiting for until you appeared in that pasture like a miracle. Their kiss was tender, filled with the promise of all the years to come, years that would bring challenges and joys, growth and change, but always, always love. Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering the Montana landscape in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting a golden glow over the family that fate or perhaps Providence had brought together, proving once again that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the greatest happiness. And in her cradle, little Elizabeth Hope Young slept soundly, secure in the knowledge, even in her infant dreams, that she had been born into a family where love was the foundation upon which everything else was built, a legacy that would sustain her and her siblings for all the days to come.